What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing another weapon breakdown for Battlefield 2042, this time covering the MCS-880. In these weapon breakdowns, we're going to be going through a bunch of stats that you guys need to know, such as the rounds per minute, reload times, bullet velocity, damage over distance, bullets to kill over distance, and time to kill over distance as well. On top of those stats, we'll then go over the recoil pattern, or in this case the blast pattern for the weapon, and then lastly I'll go over 3 unique loadouts that I've crafted for specific playstyles for those of you guys who aren't 100% sure on which attachments to use. Before we get into it though, if you guys do end up enjoying the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications, as there's going to be plenty more content like this on the way in 2022. With that being said though, guys, let's get stuck right into my weapon breakdown for the MCS-880. So the MCS is classed as a utility in 2042 and it unlocks at level 7. It can load 8 shells and it fires at a rate of 73 rounds per minute, which is obviously just over 1 round per second. Now for its reload times, it takes 0.8 seconds for both the tactical reload and the empty reload. Keep in mind that value is per shell, so obviously if you're empty then you're going to have to essentially reload 8 times going by that value. As for the velocity, it sends its ammunition down range at 400 meters per second, which is the same speed as the PBX45, so it's definitely not got great muzzle velocity, but that is obviously to be expected from a shotgun. Now getting into the more detailed stats for the MCS, this is a little bit all over the place because of how the damage stats are actually sort of going off of each pellet from each shot. So the damage seems really low, yet it is actually just multiplied by how many pellets hit the enemy. Each shot has 26 pellets, so if you hit every single enemy from up close, for example, that is taking these damage stats and multiplying them by 26, whereas if you shot them from mid-range, half of those pellets might miss, and then it is obviously going to have a huge drop-off. I did consider just showing the maximum damage stats for an entire shell rather than the damage per pellet, but at the end of the day, you can shoot someone twice from the exact same distance, and it will often deal different amounts of damage, so I've just stuck with the damage per pellet. Also keep in mind, headshots actually do the same amount of damage as a body shot with shotguns, at least according to the stats anyway. So each pellet deals 6.3 damage up to 19 meters, then between 19 and 23 meters it drops down to 3.5 damage per pellet, and then at 25 meters and beyond it drops down to 2.5 damage per pellet, so it obviously has a drastic drop off as you would expect. As for the pellets that it takes to kill over distance, and keep in mind that there are 26 pellets per shell like I said, so anything below 26 here is a one-shot kill in most cases. It'll take 16 pellets to kill up to 19 meters. From 19 to 23 meters it takes 29 pellets to kill, and then at 24 meters and beyond it'll take 40 pellets to kill an enemy. Now I usually do the time to kill as well, but just the same as a sniper, this stat is kind of irrelevant for shotguns because sometimes it's a one-shot kill, and sometimes from that same distance if you miss a few pellets it can take 2 shots to kill. So yeah, for shotguns that stat is essentially irrelevant. Now moving on, we have what I usually do as the recoil pattern, but today I thought I'd actually just show off the blast pattern more than anything. Obviously shotguns are very much randomized and inaccurate in terms of the way they spread, so keep in mind that this is going to be essentially just different every single time pretty much, but I think it does help to see it on screen anyway. Now moving on, like I mentioned, I've actually crafted 3 different loadouts that I often like to use on the MCS, depending on the mode or the map or just how I feel like playing in general. So if you're not 100% sure on which attachments to use, then hopefully this can give you guys a good starting point, and obviously these can be slightly altered and adjusted to your own preferences, so these are by no means set in stone. Also keep in mind that you can obviously bring 3 attachments per slot in the plus system, and in these loadouts I'm only showing 1 attachment per slot, so technically you can bring all 3 of these loadouts along and change them on the fly. Before we get into it, what I will say about these shotguns is that the attachments do only make very minor adjustments to the weapon, and there are also only a handful of attachments for the weapon in general, so these are all somewhat similar to be honest, but they're worth going over anyway because like I said, you can just bring all of these attachments along anyway. The first loadout that I wanted to cover is the medium range build, and this does actually make the MCS somewhat viable at that sort of mid to long range, at least long range for a shotgun anyway, so even if you barely use it, this is definitely handy to bring along in the plus system for when you are in a pinch. For the sight I use the TV 2x scope, as that is really the only scope for this weapon that has any range on it at all. For the ammo I use the slug shell. This turns your regular shells into more of a solid single projectile, meaning it works more like the GVT for example, so this is where that added range comes from. For the underbarrel I use the BCG light grip, as there are only 2 options, and from my testing in the underbarrel attachment video this is the better of the 2. And then lastly for the barrel I use the factory barrel, as the only other attachment is a suppressor, and that is definitely not ideal for adding range. Now moving on to the second loadout I wanted to cover, this one is the stealth loadout, and this is pretty much just for when you're up close and personal with the enemies and you want to try and stay off the radar and try to pretty much just stay behind enemy lines. For the sight I use the iron sights, as I personally just don't think there's all that much use in having a red dot sight. For the ammo I use the number 4 buckshot, which actually just makes the MCS this even more useful at close range, as it sort of spreads the pellets out even further, making hipfire at close range a lot more viable. For the underbarrel, I use the BCG light grip again. The laser sight is somewhat useful, but it also gives away your position because of the laser, and that's obviously not ideal at all for a stealthy type of playstyle. Lastly, for the barrel, I use the Type 4 heavy suppressor, as that is obviously the main thing that causes this to be a bit more of a stealthy build than the others. I don't usually use this loadout all that often, but I do always carry it in the plus system when I'm using the MCS, and whenever I find myself behind enemy lines without anyone really knowing, I tend to kind of just equip this and try and take out some enemies without anyone noticing me. Now, lastly, for the third loadout, this one is just the meta loadout, as I personally think this is the best overall loadout for the weapon, and in my playtime with the MCS, it is pretty much what I've had equipped 90% of the time. For the sight, I use the iron sights again. For the ammo, I use the #1 buckshot, which is just the regular ammo. For the underbarrel, I use the BCG light grip again, and then lastly for the barrel, I use the factory barrel. As you can see, this is a very basic sort of standard build. Most of these are actually just the base attachments, but from my playtime with the weapon, it does actually feel like this is the best loadout for it overall. So that is pretty much it for the MCS, guys. I won't lie, I absolutely despise using this weapon. I am genuinely dog shit at using shotguns, so I'm literally never going to use this weapon again in the rest of my life, but I'm glad to have gotten the guide out for you guys, as I know plenty of people do enjoy using shotguns. Now, that pretty much concludes all of the base primary weapons from each class, so now that those are done, let me know what weapons you guys want me to cover next, as I am largely going to start to base them off of what you guys want to see the most, so be sure to leave a comment with some recommendations down below. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you guys are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. If you want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.